There's something about Mary. No, not the movies from the late 1990s, but the other Mary, the more important Mary, the Mary that your mind should first go to. You know, the Mary that had a little lamb, you get it? Mary had a little, Jesus is the other Mary, the more important Mary, Mary the mother of God. If you're Catholic and if you're Baptist, you're thinking, no, God can't have a mother, Mary the mother of Jesus. And if you're neither, you're thinking these people have got to find something better to fight about. There's something about Mary that I can't quite put my finger on. Mary, the beloved saint of the church. Mary, who nuns have organized orders around. Mary, who the poor have formed communities around. Mary. There's something about Mary. Mary, whose image is plastered all over ancient and modern media. Mary, whose lifestyle and sex life is cause for debate between the scholars and the priests, the pastors and the feminists. Liberals and conservatives both claim Mary as their hero. There's something about Mary. As much as we celebrate Mary, as much as we remember her as a saint, as a heroine, as the mother of the church, a faithful wife and a servant of God, I'm not sure that Mary felt like she deserved these praises. I think the historical Mary was actually very different from how we remember her. I'm almost certain Mary didn't feel like a saint because, first of all, who feels like a saint? Who looks around the room and says, you know what, I deserve the favor of God? Like, who does that? But I also think that Mary didn't feel like a saint or blessed or holy because in her world, much like ours, there was the dominant belief that God's favor and blessing were immediately clear by how much wealth, power, and privilege you had. And being a young girl from a little known place, why should she believe that she was favored by God? How could Mary really feel like a saint, a powerful woman, adequate enough to be the mother of God? But I want us to imagine Mary as she likely was, 14 or 16, and imagine her relationship with Joseph. Imagine them dating, and imagine the first kiss. Them being tempted to mess around, and maybe doing that, but maybe not going all the way. And then some weeks later, by some divine conspiracy, she realizes that she's pregnant. Now, I know that the biblical account is important, but imagine how our doctrine and our teaching to our teenagers would change if we actually entertained the idea that Jesus' mother may not have been puritanical in the traditional sense. Imagine how our doctrine would change if we could say to our teenage mothers, you know, the mother of Jesus was a teenage mother herself. Right. Imagine what we could say to our young women if we told them there's nothing to be ashamed of about your body because we have the story of Mary. Imagine if we could say to millennials that the ancient Bible has a pretty modern understanding of sexuality. Imagine if we could say to people in so-called dysfunctional families that the first family in every biblical family was a dysfunctional family. And God used them to make an effect on his world. Imagine if we highlighted Mary as she likely was, a regular teenage girl that was curious and made mistakes and wanted to follow God too. Imagine the statement we could make as a church if we had a more realistic understanding of Mary. I think that many of our teachings about gender and sex and purity and inclusion and justice and love have failed us. And many of our peers, many of your peers have left the church because our notions seem too antiquated. But there's something about Mary. She stands there, reminding us that she's the ideal Christian, not because she's perfect, but because she's an ordinary person. See, if Mary never sinned, if Mary never talked back to her parents, if Mary never rolled her eyes at Joseph, if Mary never yelled at Jesus, if Mary never glanced over her fellow students' tests, if Mary never thought about who she'd have to step on the corporate ladder to climb over, how could she ever be a model for you and for me? See, seeing Mary in this way, the more realistic sense, gives more power to the words of the angel Gabriel, who said, do not be afraid, for you're favored by God. You will give birth to a son, who will be called the Most High, and his kingdom will reign forever and ever. See, that's only an extraordinary statement if Mary is an ordinary person. Yeah. Mary's fearful of the moment because she feels the weight of what the angel is telling her. And she feels undeserving and unbelieving about this. Now imagine if you're secular friends, if you're non-religious friends, if you're wild friends, if you're skeptical friends, if you're deviant friends. Imagine if they knew that there was actually a place where they could be called favored and blessed by God.
Make them think. Make them think.
Imagine if they knew that God was searching for them, trying to tell them that exactly as they are, as a single parent, as a divorcee, as an adulterer, as an alcoholic, that God had a major role for them in God's drama. God, through the angel Gabriel, literally meets Mary where she is on the edge of her bed, stressing about missing her period, and comforts her. God says to her, "Do not be afraid, for I am your God, and nothing will be impossible with me." There's something about Mary because Mary really is just one of us. And if there's something about Mary, then there's something about you. And as God calls Mary favored one and comforts her, and God is also saying that you, ordinary people, will do extraordinary things. Do you feel the weight of that? Does that scare you? Don't be scared. God said, "Do not be afraid, for I am literally with you." And that's thanks to Mary. Nothing will be impossible with God. I love that verse. What are you afraid of? What keeps you up at night? What are you searching for the words to tell the people close to you? Remember that nothing will be impossible with God. Our world needs to see that right now. Our nation needs to hear that right now. Our city needs to feel that right now. Our church needs to believe that right now. Your families need to experience that right now. You need to remember that. I gotta be honest with y'all. I've been broken by the times we live in. I've spent many nights crying and weeping for our nation, for my family, for myself, for my future kids. I've been wondering if I should even bring them into a world that already hates them because of their skin color. Wow. This keeps me up at night. But there's something about Mary, because in Mary I see the mother of Jesus. I see an amazing woman, not a perfect woman, but an amazing woman who loves justice, does mercy, and walks humbly with her God. In Mary I see a woman who gave birth and was told by the very messenger of God that she would give birth to a son that they would call the Most High God. And I see Mary triumphing in that and believing in that and celebrating that, saying, "My soul magnifies the name of the Lord because he's lifted the lowly with favor and scattered the proud." I see a Mary believing that. I also see Mary watching her son grow up to be a beautiful and brilliant young man as he teaches the scholars and rabbis, hoping to see him one day become a scholar and a rabbi himself. I see Mary in the crowds as her son feeds the 15,000 and heals the blind and the sick and the lame and the broken. I see Mary as she sees her son stand up for righteousness and care for the least of these and welcome the children and stand in solidarity with the poor and defend the fatherless and seek the lost. I see Mary triumphing, but I also see Mary watching her son get arrested, seeing him beat, seeing him nailed to the cross, seeing him crucified. And I see that Mary. I see her wailing in the public streets and cursing at the angel Gabriel, demanding that he never speak for God again. I see that Mary in the mother of Trayvon Martin. I see that Mary in the mother of Mike Brown. I see that Mary in the mother, wife, and daughter of Eric Garner. I see that Mary in the mother of John Crawford, in the mother of Oscar Grant, in the mother of Jordan Davis, of Sean Bell, of Amadou Diallo, and of Tamir Rice. And together I see those mothers of targeted, abused, crucified, and vilified, murdered young men shouting at God, weeping in their bedrooms, wailing in the public streets, wondering what happened to their favor, what happened to their blessing. And I'm reminded that there is indeed something about Mary, because Mary represents a very different side of God. Mary gives birth to Jesus and thus gives birth to God. And Mary is the mother of God, and as the mother of God, she's the mother of love. And as the mother of love, Mary is demanding, "Where is my justice?" And God says to Mary, and God says to those mothers, and perhaps God says to you, remember, for nothing is impossible with God. And God says to Mary, and God says to those mothers, and perhaps God says to you, remember, for you birthed love. And I'm love. And God says to Mary, and God says to those mothers, and perhaps God says to you through the voice of his prophet Martin Luther King Jr., that the other side of love is justice. And justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. And God says to Mary, and God says to those mothers, and perhaps God says to you through his servant Paul Tillich, that they birthed love. That love is the ultimate principle of justice, and that love reunites the estranged, and justice protects that which has been united. And God reminds them through his prophet Cornel West that justice is what love looks like in public. And God says, yes, there's something about Mary, but not just something about Mary, something about those mothers, and not just something about those mothers, something about their slain children, and not just something about their slain children, but something about all of God's children. If you think there's something special about Mary, it's because there's something special about you. Well, if you think there's something special about you, there's something special about your God. That's all right. Because this is the same God who called Mary favored as she sat on the edge of her bed, scared. It's the same God who told Elizabeth that she would give birth to a child when the doctor said she was barren. It is the same God who muted Zechariah's speech. The same God that turned a shepherd into a king. The same God that turned a prisoner into a prime minister. The same God that turned a prince into an advocate of the people. The same God that lighted a bush on fire but did not consume it so that you would notice him. The same God that reminds us that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. The same God that turned evil into love, that turned murder into salvation, that turned xenophobia into Philadelphia. The same God is reminding you that nothing is impossible with him. The same God is trying to tell you that you ordinary people will do extraordinary things. Yeah. The same God searching for you, seeking for you, calling you blessed and favored.
Amen. Amen. Amen.